true. I've been doing this for 40 years. Before there were PCs, we were using IBM 360s that filled up a whole room. Had to be air conditioned and stuff like that, running around with discs this size at major hospitals in New York City at midnight shift to 7 a.m. so we could process our data. We didn't have high-speed video, we had high-speed film with special sprocket holes and special projectors. So we could, digitizing by projecting it onto all kinds of things. I started out with the United States Olympic Sports Medicine Committee. Can I get my first slide here somehow? There it is. I'm going to be talking today about one of our technologies. And I realize that the audience, both here and on the internet, is a combination of people who are veterinarians, researchers, professionals in the horse business. So this presentation will be kind of a combination of an ordinary scientific paper presentation and kind of a description of who we are and what we do. We don't just, I can't switch the slides to the next slide, I guess. Let's see where we are. Will guide me. Who are we? Okay, there it is. What do we do? Oh, next one. They're right there, right there. We're actually a bloodstock agency. We actually buy racehorses for major racing stables in the United States. 6 of the top 10 racing stables are our clients. So we have to combine, we had to have some of the best people, trainers, jockeys, veterinarians, all kinds of staff and in bloodstock and pedigree and everything else, so we could actually put the whole thing together, sort through the technologies that were out there, and also we tried to adapt technologies from what was being done with human athletes in the Olympics. In 1976, the East Germans burst on the scene and started winning all kinds of medals and being leaders at the Olympics, which had previously been a contest between the Russians and the United States. And there was a panic about how they were doing it. They thought there were mad scientists in basements with kindergartners and things. It turned out to be a lot of steroids. But it gave a kick to the research. So we started the United States Olympic Sports Medicine Committee that was doing research. One of the first, and I was one of the people who got involved with that to begin with. I worked with the human athletes in the bobsled team and the figure skating before I went to the horses, and then finally the race horses. One of the first things we discovered was the difference between normal and injured or sick in the databases was as big a difference as the difference between normal and the elite athletes, meaning we didn't have any data on what it was we were trying to understand. So we had to develop the data. For me, I had to develop a heart rate meter for horses with a custom chip made by Hitachi something like 30 years ago that could stand with electrodes moving around and weather and this and that and the other. We had to invent an echocardiogram machine that could go into a stall at a race track and accurately and reproducibly get echocardiographic images and measurements. And then we had to build data. For our, we filmed and we've published it. I brought today copies of my papers, which I can hand out to you. So there's mountains of data I have with me. And it's both in hard copy and I have it on flash drive. So if you'd like to pick that up, you can do that. Or you can download it from our website, which is www.eqb.com. But just to give you an idea, there are other speakers on biomechanics and gait analysis, but we've published on all those things. We buried force plates in racetracks. We followed 15,000 major racehorses at major racetracks, digitizing every step they took and analyzing it every imaginable way using engineering professors from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology and the biomechanists from the Olympic Committee and that kind of thing. And then we published the results. There's a mountain of data there. We did the same thing with the heart stuff. It's 12, it was 12,000 horses, I think, for the gait analysis, and it's, I think it's, I don't even remember how many, or 7,500 out of the gait analysis, 12,000 for the heart study over 15 years, and then we followed every split of every race they ran. So, and looked for what were the relationships. And we've done that kind of thing across a whole spectrum of technologies. Next slide. So we've tried to be innovators. This is our stretch limousine to the races. Did I skip a slide there? Oh, yeah, the Lord. I'm often asked to be an expert witness now in legal cases, and often there's a miscommunications there and trying to get technology, horse technology into the real world. I don't know. I can tell these are photos. Anyway, the next one. Okay, so the data is available. These papers are not ponies in a lab. These are real racehorses, the major racetracks, France, England, the United States, thousands of them and over multiple years, and using multivariate discriminant analysis on the results. You can download, I said you can download the papers. I did everything in the beginning. I looked at every possible technology. I followed horses to the race paddock before a race and measured the weight of their poop, for example. And I think I'm going through that. Next slide. Oh, I think I'll skip this one. This is about some of the other technologies out of there that are out there. Let's go right to the heart scanning. The path to heart scanning started a long time ago with people listening to hearts and looking at chest sizes. Then there was a doctor in Australia who developed the heart score, where he was measuring distances between the peaks in the QRST complex of an EKG of a racehorse. And there were some problems with that because when you're out doing that in the field, the voltages vary, and the little machine that was running the tape that you were going to make measurements on would be projected at different speeds. So there was a lot of error in it. So we decided that we would do it differently. Next slide. So, back. I think we just went through 2 or 3 there. Did I cover this? I probably did. Okay, yeah, the heart path. Next one. Yeah, okay, the next one. Okay, so we decided we would do it differently, but we knew we needed a lot of data. So before going to that, one of the first problems we had was we were trying to predict the performance of racehorses. And the first thing we ran into is what's performance? How do you define performance? What's elite? Just like in the Olympics, in the Olympics we had a better measure of it, but we had to benchmark, we had to study those elite athletes. And in the racehorses, it wasn't even clear who they were. There were problems with drugs, different distances, different definitions of performance. So we decided we needed a ton of data. So what did we do? Let's see, what have I got here? Oh, I'm looking at what we were up against, the subset of the population. The number of starters is only 68%, between 85 and 94. By the foals, by the top 1% sires was 84%. You get down to the number of grade 1 stakes winners, which would probably be your definition of elite, and you're down to 0.2%, even 1.2%, even if you go to the very best pedigrees. So that's not very many horses. So if you're trying to collect data on racehorses, you're going to have a whole lot of racehorses before you're going to have very many of these elite athletes to study. Next slide. Well, there's one definition of performance. Okay, almost half of the foals born in the United States never race. So, and as I say, 0.2% are earning a considerable amount of money to be considered elite. So it's a really, really small group of animals. Next. And no one variable tells the whole story. We learned that. There are many variables that are critically important. They interact mightily with each other, and a lot of them are wild cards. You're not going to be able to predict them. Injury, to some extent we can predict it, but there are also accidents. And attitude right now, I don't know anybody who's really good at predicting the attitude. And if there are no free agents, and if they don't want to run when they're tired, then they're not gonna. Okay, so then I said, well, how's everybody else doing measuring performance? These are the top agents in the world buying racehorses. And the percentage of stakes winners, if you go over to the right, the highest is maybe 15%. And these are really good guys at 10%, and that's stakes winners. And that could be a $10,000 race in somewhere in the heartland of the United States nobody's ever heard of. So it's not graded stakes winners. When you get down to graded stakes winners, they're down around 4 or 5%. So these guys that are supposed to be experts at the top of the racing game are recognized internationally are wrong 95% of the time in defining performance of young racehorses. Next. So what about our track record? Well, we're now using what we've learned, and some of it I've got there for you in those papers, to look at horses running with high-speed videos and look inside their hearts and their spleens and that kind of thing. And how have we done? Well, we've been the buyer of multiple world champions, bought them as yearlings, and over 40 grade 1 winners as unraced young horses, and through this multi-modal approach. Next, please. This is just a list of some of the horses that. So we're not it's not theory with us. We've taken it to practice, and we've got results. Oh, American Pharaoh, he was the Triple Crown winner. You may have heard of him in the United States. He had the top time form rating in the world. It was 2005. We were on the front page of our New York Times, front page center, the day before he won the Triple Crown, describing what our role was with that. Next slide, please. How else have we done? Well, the Kentucky Derby is one of the major Grade 1 races in our country, and we've been there. This is just a short list of every year. We have multiple horses that we bought that are qualified for it. Next slide. Some more of them. Back-to-back Breeders' Cup. We've had back-to-back World Cup winners, with et cetera, et cetera. Next slide. Okay, this one's interesting. 30,000 foals a year are born in the United States, registered thoroughbreds. 20 qualify through their performance for our Kentucky Derby. And so, you know, that's a teeny weeny percentage. And in 2015, we had 5 of the entries, which was a full 20%. There were horses we bought as young horses. Next. Okay, let's just keep going. I'll stop talking about that kind of thing. Let's get right to the research, the methodology. Okay, we got veterinarians and statisticians, human doctors, biomechanists to create the methodology and to help us execute it, interpret it, write it, and it's been published in a refereed journal. The Journal of Equine Veterinary Medicine, which is one of the leading refereed veterinary journals in the United States, and I have the copies here. The other thing we did was, it's a very long article about the heart scan research because we wanted to show that other variables that might have been the reason for the differences in performance in the horse, in the 12,000 horses in the study, could be separated out, and we could get right to the dependent variable and show that that was a profound cause of performance. Next. Actually, I shouldn't say cause. It isn't causal, it's a correlation. I don't know what the cause was, but I sure as hell know. These measurements of the thickness of the septal wall of the left ventricle, the volume of the left ventricle in can't even speak, and systole, turned out to be extremely important. So did the cross-section of the spleen, by the way. Okay, what horses were in the study? Let's see. Oh, this is more on the composition study. Why do we need such a large sample? This is an interesting slide. There were 7,434 unique horses. They were divided between colts and fillies. Then we divided each of them into North American and foreign because they're running on different surfaces, different distances, under different conditions. Then we divided them by age. They were really between about 12 months and about 28 months. Then we divided each of those categories into their race records up to the end of their 3-year-old year. We stopped then because after that often there's injuries and the really good horses may drop down in class and muddy their records. Then within each of those categories we dropped it down to the earnings, virtually no earnings, middle-level earnings, and elite kind of earnings. And then within each of those we divided it by turf and dirt. And then in each of those categories we divided into the distance they ran. By the time you're finished, you need the 7,000 horses to have any kind of a sample size for each one of the groups, and it turns out that's extremely important. Next slide. Okay, there were other variables here, the sex, the size, and the age that could relate to performance, and that could relate to the heart. So if you just were measuring the heart size, the left ventricle and diastole, or the septal wall, you really needed to know accurately the sex, the size, and the age. So we had to divide, we couldn't compare horses across those. Here, for example, are charts. One of them shows months of age versus the left ventricle and diastole size, divided by colts and fillies. You see it's quite different. The other one is the weight of the horse, just the general size of them. We did height and weight and then a height weight. And you'll see that there's a very different, the weight of the horse affects the left ventricle and diastole variable. And it's predictable. Next. Okay, we had to show that we were reproducible. We were going around at the time versus the normal protocol for the echocardiography of the heart. It wasn't really, we tried it with the machinery that we had invented to go into the stalls, which is now commercially available, and we couldn't really get it reproducibly. We ended up going around to the other side of the horse and using custom transducers at higher megahertz so that we could get something that was reproducible. Our methodology is described in the paper, and this is just one of the charts that shows that we were proving that we could, in fact, on multiple measurements of the same subject over time, get the same results. Next slide. Okay, so we weren't using the standard cardiac view to begin with. It took years of practice for technicians to do these thousands of horses, and get it so they were reproducible. If you're trying to do this at home, as they say, small differences in the angle of the transducer are obviously going to give you very great differences in the measurement you get of distances. So you really need the practice. You need to prove out your technician is reproducible, and it's not so easy before you go collecting and interpreting this data. The way I describe it, I think Malcolm Gladwell said it takes 10,000 hours to get really good at anything, and I think that's what it took us. People say, well, why can't everybody just do the heart scanning? I said, well, they can buy the machine and read the paper, but it's like buying a violin and an instruction manual. It takes some time to play a symphony. Next. Okay, this is size again, weight versus the septal wall thickness and the left ventricle now in systole. You'll see again the weight's playing an important size. So what? So when you can't compare a 18-month-old 900-pound filly to a 21-month-old 1,000-pound colt and think you're the same kinds of measurements. You've got to compare them to each other, only within the same weight, height, size, sex. We would compare within plus or minus 30 pounds, plus or minus 30 days of the age of the animal, the same sex, weight, and height. Go ahead, next. And we have those databases, so now it's all in our computers. This is the chronological age, showing how important the age is. You can see that the left ventricle and diastole sizes over the months of age change. You'll also see the most disparity, or the most variation in the data here between 19 and 21 months, which is when they're entering puberty. There's a growth spurt. You don't know where they are in there. So there's a whole lot more variation if you're trying to measure in that time period. Next. The sex matters. Again, you see a big variation, more with the fillies, when they go through puberty there, between 19 and 21 months. Next. Okay, so what do? When you get enough data, you can normalize it. You can take their percentage size, for example, of the septal wall and of the left ventricle and diastole, and you can only get to all the horses that were at 50% for their age, sex, size, weight, everything else. And so then you can compare an 18-month-old 900-pound filly to a colt with the other variables, and get large sample sizes. And then what do we get? And this one is months of age versus the mean LVD. But this is, again, you see a relationship between the age and the LVD. Anyway, next. Okay, this one, I call it the sadly simple truth, that the bigger horses had bigger hearts. So you can't compare the smaller horses. Also, the bigger horses earn more money. This is earnings per start versus mean weight percentile. So you could go to a sale and buy the biggest horses, and you'd be doing better than a lot of the professionals. Of course, you would not if you bought one with a crooked leg or something else drastically wrong with it. But clearly, the size of the horse was a major determinant of it, even as a yearling, of what for its age, sex, and size. For its age and sex, I mean, the size of the horse was a big determinant of performance. So you had to eliminate that in your normalized data if you were going to try to figure out what was the effect of the heart, especially since the bigger horses had bigger hearts. So we did that. Next. Okay, this is the discriminant model results, high earners versus low earners. Blind test. We did all this with all this data. We did it for all the horses with names from N to Z and names from A to N and for sexes and colts and every which way to see if the results would be different, and they were not. So then we knew we were really onto something. If you look at the quartiles here, I don't know if I can. The high earners, let's see if we can figure this out. Low earners here, 423 of them. I'm trying to figure this out here. I never can do it when I'm up in front of the stage. But the main idea is that your percentage of good horses almost doubles when you get to the horses that had the bigger hearts. The higher the percentage of any one group. Well, I'll let you figure it out on my paper. Next slide. Okay, and this one, for example, the high earners here go from 27% to 38% in the pre-model to the post-model probabilities. So in other words, before we did anything, there were 27% of them were high earners. After we applied this measurement of the heart normalized data, we get up to 38%. So we're going up over 10%. It's almost 30% more. Bang, one variable, knowing nothing else about the horse. Next. This is the same kind of thing, and it shows the same kind of thing. Oh, where are we? They're bouncing around here. It shows the same kind of thing. The 0 to 25%, what is that? That's the height, weight. Those are the smallest horses at the top, the biggest horses at the bottom. No, wrong. Well, I don't know. But I can tell you that what it was, we would apply the model, and the percentage of horses that were high earners within the group after you applied the model was almost always 25 to 50% bigger, knowing nothing else. Next. This one's a little simpler. You can see that below average heart weight, and below average LVD, left ventricle and diastole, there was a 12% probability of them doing well. And if you had the above average height weight and above average LVD, you had 4 times the chance they were going to be a major earner when they grew up and raced. Next. Okay, that get back to definitions of performance. $10,000 a start may not be good enough, so we did other definitions of performance, and we got the same kind of thing, 17% to 50%. Next. Normalize, let's just go through them. Because I have them all available on flash drives for you and on the hard copy, and you can download it from our website. Next slide. Okay, pedigree. So what does pedigree tell you? We did take a look at how it related, and I think this kind of tells you, these are the sales, these are the auctions in the United States. And as you get to the more elite and more expensive auctions, you find that the hearts are bigger. They're thicker septal walls, they're bigger left ventricles for normalized data, for their size, weight, age, sex, and size. So apparently pedigree's doing something. When we tried to nail down what it was doing, we couldn't do it, even with all our data. So somebody who gathers more than 7,000 horses over 10 years can maybe figure that out. Next. Okay, I was going to say some cautionary tales about new tech. It took me 40 years, and I got nowhere the first 20 years because I thought I was going to be the bringer of the holy grail with all my technology, until I got paired up with Patty Miller, who was a jockey and a trainer and a lifelong horseman, and with some of the great trainers in the United States, like the trainer of the Triple Crown horse, Seattle Slew, Billy Turner, and they got involved. We didn't go anywhere. Once we were combining what we did with the very best traditional horse people and their knowledge from 300 years distilled of experience, then we got really good at what we did. And also after our technicians had their 10,000 hours, and so everybody was doing things reproducibly and the data was good, things started to pop. So I had 20 years of disaster, and then it took it that long to be an overnight success. There's a lot of stuff out there we tried that people claim was science, and we went in and looked at their methodologies, and it was awful. It was people who didn't have the proper training, they hadn't used the proper experts to help them, they didn't have enough data, they had a single variable they were in love with, and it went on and on and on and on. So, there's a lot of great new technologies out there. A lot of them are going to require developing massive data before they're really useful, and you have to be really careful about grabbing any one of them and running, and to changing your program would be my caveat. Next slide. That's it, I guess. For me, I'm probably over time, and you've got some feel for who we are, what we've done, and about heart scanning racehorse hearts. The exact methodology with the 2D echocardiograph system is in the paper I have available for you, for those who want details. And again, I would stress, data before you jump on a new technology. And these papers will give you thousands of horses' data over 15 years. Thank you.